So a revolution, making the digital pivot, thinking about things differently, creating different business models. Keith Nash, who's the Vice President of Process and Technology for the Residential Business Unit with Lennox International, is going to talk next. And Keith was my last presenter to get his presentation, and he kept telling me that presentations are like fine wine, and he was baking his up last night. But Keith is redefining service. You know, if you think about service parts and air conditioners and heating units, they tend to always break right when the seasons change, right? So you need air conditioning and suddenly it gets to be a hot day and...
Cool, so you link that all through.
The dealer normally does that for the customer.
Cool.
And that's how we get that address information.
Excellent, thank you.
But location matters.
It does.
Let's reinvent service.
Okay.
Let's imagine what it can be. Thank you.
Yep.
So our next speaker is Edwin, and Edwin is the program director of FloraHolland. And I met Edwin when I was in Brussels, and we were talking about the Royal FloraHolland exchange and the business model, and he's actually in charge of re-engineering this model to really improve floriculture. And you know, flowers make us all happy. So I thought I'd put Edwin at the end of the day, and then we're going to do a panel to imagine the digital supply chain. So if Edwin can come up, yes? And we do love flowers, so there's nothing more like the Netherlands than tulips, eh?
Yes, that's true.
Yes. So here's your clicker.
Thank you.
Let's imagine, because flowers all make us happy.
I hope so.
Yes.
I hope so to energize you also again with the flowers. So let's go to my presentation. So my presentation is about creating customer value end-to-end via supply chain innovation. That's basically also the topic of my presentation. And I really like to emphasize customer in my presentation to you today. But I also want to, especially want to share my thoughts about horizontal collaboration and social innovation or mental shift. And I'll come back to that later. But before going into depth, I would like to introduce to you our wonderful world of flowers and plants. I'm also clicking immediately, I see. And give you some insights in our supply chain. So, customer value in the case of flowers is about the quality of flowers. And if we talk about, let's say, the quality of flowers, normally we talk about the 7 days vase life guarantee. Does anybody of you have ever bought flowers with a 7 days vase life guarantee? There were some people from the UK, most likely they are familiar with it. But it's also about an acceptable price level and also about sustainability. And if I talk about sustainability, I would like to talk about CO2, reachability and livability. And especially in the Netherlands, can you imagine that every out of 10 trucks in the Netherlands are actually containing, let's say, perishable floricultural products. But before going into depth, I would like to come back to these flowers, which were specially bought for us today. Because can you imagine in the Dutch context that these flowers could be supplied to the Netherlands out of 60 different countries? And actually they are being supplied by over 4,000 growers. And can you also imagine that these growers themselves are responsible for the supply of the goods to FloraHolland? And how come? Well, basically, Royal FloraHolland is a cooperative. That means that the ownership of the cooperative lies with our 4,000 members. And these 4,000 members, in that sense, own the company. So what does Royal FloraHolland provide to these growers as a cooperative? We offer a marketplace where to sell the flowers, and we market their products. So talking about some more commercial facts, we talk about a 4.6 billion euro turnover, 12.5 billion flowers, which we sell yearly, 20,000 different varieties, and over 115,000 commercial transactions daily. So talking about the digital pivot, we are, let's say, doing a lot of, we need a very strong ICT systems behind it. And we actually export to 140 countries. The main countries are Germany, United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Belgium. And also countries like Russia are very important. But if you would go on a cruise, most likely the flowers which you buy on the cruise ships are actually being supplied out of the Netherlands. And we also supply a lot of products to the US. In the past years, we have been supplying a lot of tulips, for instance, which are actually shipped over. But if you look at our traditional supply chain, this supply chain is basically unable to meet the requirements set out if you talk about price level, sustainability, and quality. Because if you, for instance, look at the airline supply chain, it's too expensive, too polluting, and there's no quality control. And please do not forget, we have a lot of our growers are actually located in Kenya and also Ethiopia. And only Kenya is already responsible for the export of 120,000 tons of flowers. So basically, looking to, let's say, the requirements set out, we needed innovation. And so the question is, how can we create customer value throughout the supply chain, taking into mind people, planet, profit? And if the ambition is a quality product with a phase life guarantee, a sustainable supply chain, and an affordable product, we have to come up with new solutions and innovations for the future. So we need to think out of the box. And one of my inspirations is actually Einstein, who said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking you used when we created them. And this is also the reason why I'm always actively looking for new ideas outside my own sector. Because you cannot learn it within your sector, you have to look outside. And that's also one of the reasons why I'm very enthusiastic to speak here today, but also to learn from your other presentations, because they inspire me for the future. In the last years, we did a lot of projects. We innovated by using containerized transport. We used the rail, the barge, and also deep sea transport. And the funny thing is that these innovations met our standard concerning people, planet, profit. The result of using containerized transport was a quality product, meeting customer expectation, a cheaper supply chain, but also more sustainable. But we also had another good result because we had much more cooperation in the supply chain with our stakeholders and partners. And I think this is also one of the objectives set out here in these days. And last but not least, a mental shift, a change of behavior and thinking about how to transport flowers for the future. So here you can see some savings, and I think that's huge. If you talk about CO2, if you talk about cost, there's a huge potential in sea container transport. But perhaps it's not very new for you, but I can tell you, and it's perhaps also not even so interesting, but I can tell you this development for us in our industry were a revolution. And I think there has been talks about it already today, about revolutioning the supply chain. Well, using containers, it was one. Because transport of flowers by sea, the question was, can this be done? Sure it can, but you have to meet a lot of requirements. And first of all, you need to control the complete supply chain before doing so. So can you imagine what a skepticism I had to overcome by doing this project? So by sharing this today with you, I wanted to state that innovation in the supply chain contributed highly to delivering value to the customers. But I also wanted to share with you today my lessons learned about innovation and creating value in the supply chain can only be achieved by three main things. It's about technical innovation, it's about process innovation, but it's also about social innovation. And for my matter and alike, I think these last days we have been talking not enough about the social aspects of the supply chain, because I think it's quite important also to make innovation work. So I would like to come back to the sea container transport, because for achieving this innovation in supply chain, we needed the right partners. We needed right people with the right knowledge, I think it's also been stated today that knowledge is quite important. But first of all, I think we needed people with the right energy. But if you don't have the right energy and motivation, at the end of the day, the innovation will not work. Because in the end of the day, innovation is about cooperation between people. And to be quite honest, we could not have done it alone. So when we started out, the idea of transporting flowers into sea containers, we were looking out for information and knowledge. And we actually came up with a company called Transfresh. By any chance, anybody in this room knows Transfresh as a company? Okay, it's a Californian-based company. They have a lot of knowledge about to ship berries on the conditioned atmosphere. Does anybody know Chiquita? Okay, either you're all sleeping or you're... I cannot imagine that only 4 hands know Chiquita, but okay. So Transfresh is a daughter company of Chiquita. Okay, so this and other projects gave me a very important insight, to be quite honest. People and the willingness to work together, to change and to adopt to new innovations make all the difference to bridge the gap between success and no success. But the biggest lesson was for me, no innovation without a social innovation or a mental shift. And if I talk about social innovation, basically what I talk about is the change of behavior of all companies in the supply chain. And I think that's quite important to grasp. And my secret weapon in doing these projects was basically in 6 elements. First of all, if you talk about innovation, use the KISS principle. Again, does anybody know the KISS principle? Yes, thank you. You're waking again. Very good. Keep it simple, stupid, or keep it simple and smile, somebody else said. Make sure you have a clear concept which everybody understands. And also use professionals where you don't have the knowledge yourself, if you try to innovate. And involve companies, but don't involve companies only on the management level, but try to involve companies on all levels of the organization, so from management until blue-collar people, to make them aware of the innovation you want to achieve. Because if people have to change their way they pack the goods, the way they cut the goods, the preconditioning, the post-harvest, etc., they need to understand why they do it. And also understand the objectives of why you want to work together on these type of projects. Because you can imagine so many stakeholders in the supply chain, they don't have all have the same objective. But as long as you talk about it, you can try to meet and find a solution to meet the objectives. And the last thing we used a lot in our innovation projects was a psychologist. And I'm not bringing in the sofa right now, but what we did with the psychologist is basically sit down the table, discuss about the matters, and he would pinpoint out where there was, let's say, a different understanding. So we could work on that. So looking into the future, I see a need for much more cooperation. And not only the willingness for people to adapt, but especially the willingness for companies to work together. I feel this is most easily done in a non-competitive environment. If I talk about collaboration or cooperation, if you talk about horizontal cooperation, a lot of people immediately start to think about, I have to work with my competitor. I would advise not to do so. Try to work together with non-competitive companies. And as Hao Li, a very famous American professor already said it, instead of a company-to-company competition, we're now in an area of supply chain to supply chain competition. And I think that's very true. So at the end of the day, it's not a company who wins the competition, it will be your supply chain with your partners who does it. So how should this look like, horizontal collaboration? Well, I think shippers should unite on a 5PL level. And I think today we already heard a lot of other stories about shippers, how successful they were. But I think for the future, and if you want to go to the next level, and especially I think our speaker of BASF will understand the 4PL layer here, we have to develop new concepts. And we have to develop new concepts together with other shippers in balancing routes, bundling and synchronizing streams. But you will also we need to make clear what the business objectives are. And we should make sure that we organize this on a strategic, tactical, and operational level. Because too often, if we talk about collaboration, it's only thought about on the operational level. And I think you need to think about your governance. How do you want to structure your cooperation? Do you want to set up a strategic alliance, a joint venture, or another form of governance? But you also should think about your pain and gain sharing. Who's going to invest? Who's going to take the burden? So very key in this matter is that shippers take fully responsibility. Shippers cannot give this responsibility to their logistics service provider. If we want to go to the next level, shippers again need to take full responsibility in organizing the supply chain and feel responsible if they ship a container, let's say, to the other part of the world, that this container also comes back. So the issue, of course, is that in the last years, a lot of the shippers outsource their logistics departments, even if they have huge supply chain departments that do not have all the knowledge in-house. My point would be just hire people who have and make sure you can do it. This, for me, is the only way to get to the next level in logistics. So do not ask your service provider what they can do for you, but ask yourself what you can do for your service provider, so that your service provider can perform the job you required him to do, and that is execute an excellent supply chain. So the other takeaway I brought with you today is, in the case of building and guiding coalition, is the 10 lessons learned of successful collaboration. This is not something which I put on a slide on a Sunday afternoon. This is coming out of a research which we did together with the University of Amsterdam. Everybody knows Amsterdam, of course, so this is we did together. And you see there are some aspects which I already mentioned before. Start simple, you think big, start small, but also make sure you have a clear governance structure. And the last thing I think is also very important to mention, if you start a collaboration or a cooperation, think about how you can also end it. Because it's like falling into love. When you're in love, it's not a problem to talk about how you could separate. But if you're not in love anymore, it's way more difficult. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. Let's work together and collaborate. But please keep in mind, it's our mind which makes the difference. So let us start to work together and show shippers and people all over the world how cooperation and adoption of supply chain innovation delivers true value end to end, now and in the future, and hopefully in 2030. Thank you very much for your attention.
So we have deliberately been talking about the redefinition of transport, of manufacturing, and really about relationships. Now, if you think back when we asked people to define the digital pivot, a lot of the discussion was around data and analytics. But I think we have a lot of process innovation that's an opportunity in front of us. And, you know, we accept a lot of processes, and I think we shouldn't, right? And so when you talk about true collaboration, what have you learned? What is the essence of that relationship?
Well, the essence, if you talk about the innovations which I did in the last years, that if you don't have the energy of the people who want the innovation to work, it will always fail. So, and how often are you not sitting in a meeting that we say, okay, good idea, let's come together and work on it, and you never see each other again after that. So one thing is for sure, that innovation will not work. So in all the, so I only showed the sea container project, but we also did a barge project in the Netherlands. And we had so much enthusiasm that from the moment we sat down until the first container went by barge, it only took a month because everybody put their strength and energy behind it, and it became a very nice project, and we had a very good proof of concept.
So do you think you're driving a revolution like Chris, or is this an evolution?
Oh no, I think if you start to ship flowers in a sea container, it's quite a revolution. Yeah,
right.
That's not an evolution. No.
Yeah, okay.
No, it's not like that you put let's say, a plane on the boat and say, okay, this is an evolution. No, that would be foolish, but no, this is a revolution.
Okay. Well,